Montana Territory, 1879. The wind howled over the plains as the sun dipped behind the crazy mountains, casting long shadows across the scorched grass. Gunmetal clouds rolled in from the west, and thunder rumbled low like a warning. On the edge of the storm rode a woman, her skirts torn, her boots caked in dried blood, and her arms wrapped around the tiny bundle tucked against her chest. Perrie Monroe did not look back. She had nothing left behind her worth looking at. The baby, barely 3 days old, let out a soft whimper. Perrie tightened her grip, her eyes burning from wind and grief. She had not named the child yet. She did not know if she should. The girl's mother, Perrie's older sister, had died birthing her on the dirt floor of a wagon near the Musselshell River. The man who had left them there, her sister's no-good husband, had taken off before the contractions even began. Perrie had buried her sister alone under a cottonwood tree and then walked for 2 days, barefoot and bleeding, until she found a horse grazing near an abandoned line shack. She took it. She did not feel bad. By the time she rode into Willow Creek, she had not slept in 3 days and had not spoken a word in 2. The town was quiet, built up around a single wide street flanked with a saloon, a general store, and a livery. A few men turned to look at her as she passed, their eyes narrow, their mouths tight. She was used to that. A woman alone always drew suspicion. A woman with a baby and no ring judgment. She dismounted in front of the feed store and tied the reins to the rail, her hands trembling from hunger. Before she could take a step forward, the door beside her opened and a tall man stepped out, wiping his palms on his trousers. "Ma'am," his voice was low, steady. His eyes were dark, steady too, but not unkind. He looked like he belonged in this place, dust on his shoulders, a revolver at his hip, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow like a white thread. "I do not need help," Perrie said, louder than she meant to. He looked down at the baby in her arms, then back up. "That your child?" "No," she said. "My sister's. She died." "I am sorry," she nodded once. "I do not belong to anyone." He studied her for a long moment, then shifted his weight and said quietly, "Then belong to me and our child." Perrie froze. He held up his hands. "I did not mean to scare you. You look like hell. And that baby needs a home. I got one. If you need a place to stay, I have a cabin up the ridge. My name is Gideon Rourke." Perrie's heart pounded. "You do not even know me." "I do not need to. I have seen enough to know you are not running from nothing small. And I reckon you would not have made it this far if you did not have grit." She stared at him. "Why would you take us in?" Gideon looked at the baby again. "Because that child did not choose this, and maybe you did not either." A hot tear slid down her cheek. She wiped it away fast and glanced toward the livery down the road. "You got a horse, 3, and a wagon. How far is your place?" 3 miles. She looked down at the baby. Her tiny mouth opened and closed like a fish, seeking warmth, food, safety, all things Perrie could not give her alone. "I will come," she said, "but just for the night." Gideon nodded once. "That is enough for now." They rode out as the sky cracked open above them, rain chasing their tracks. The wagon creaked over the rocky trail, the baby cradled in Perrie's lap beneath a blanket Gideon had handed her without a word. He did not ask questions. He did not try to pry. He just drove, his eyes on the road and his jaw set like stone. His cabin sat tucked in a grove of aspen trees, smoke curling from the chimney. It was small but solid, with a wooden porch and a corral out back. Gideon climbed down first, then helped Perrie down gently, his hands steady at her waist. "Come inside," he said. "You can dry off and rest. I will make something to eat." Inside was warm, the fire already lit, a kettle hanging over the flames. Perrie sat near it, her boots steaming, while Gideon stirred beans in a cast iron pot. The baby slept against her chest, her tiny fists curled under her chin. "You have a name for her?" he asked. "Not yet." He spooned food into 2 bowls and handed one to her. She took it, her hands shaking again. He noticed. He did not say anything. After they ate, he brought out a bundle of clean cloth and laid it beside her. "She needs changing," he said. "I had some from my sister's little one." "She passed years ago." Perrie looked up at him. "You have been through it too." He met her eyes. "We all have." She nodded. Later, when the baby woke crying, Gideon stood and took her gently from Perrie's arms. "Go lie down," he said. "You look like you have not slept in a week." I have not. He cradled the child against his chest, rocking her slowly. Then sleep, I will keep her safe. Perrie watched him for a long time, her heart aching in a way she had not felt in years. Then she lay back on the bed in the corner and closed her eyes. For the first time in days she slept. When she woke, it was morning. The sun filtered through the window, golden and soft. Gideon sat near the fire, the baby tucked in his arms, fast asleep. She likes you, Perrie whispered. Gideon looked over at her. She is easy to like. Perrie sat up, brushing her hair back. I should go, you could stay. I told you, I do not belong to anyone. He stood, walked over, and held the baby out to her. Then belong to me and our child. Perrie looked down at the baby. Her chest tightened. What if I do not know how? She whispered. Then we will figure it out together. She looked up at him, really looked. He had not asked for anything. He had not tried to take anything. He had only given. She reached for his hand. Her name is Hope, she said softly. Gideon smiled. That is a fine name, Perrie nodded. She was born into nothing, but maybe now, maybe she has a chance. Gideon's thumb brushed over her knuckles. You both do. And for the first time in her life, Perrie let herself hope that maybe he was right. The next morning brought a hush to the land, the kind that came after a hard rain. The air was damp and cool, and the sky stretched pale and wide above the hills. Perrie stood on the edge of the porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching the mist rise from the earth like breath. Her bare feet rested on the worn pine boards, still damp from the night. Inside, Hope stirred. Perrie could hear the soft rustle of blankets and the faint, hiccuping sighs of a baby waking slowly. Gideon moved around the stove with quiet ease, his boots shifting gently across the planked floor. She didn't turn to look, but she listened how he didn't rush, didn't speak unless it was needed. I thought I might head to town before noon, he said, voice carrying through the open door. Perrie stepped back inside, drawing the blanket tighter. For what? Milk cows low. Need dried milk for Hope, maybe a few other things. He paused, glancing at her. You'll be all right here, she nodded. She sleeps better up here than she ever did on the trail. You sleep better too. She looked away, but her voice was steady. She's not my child. She's not mine either. Don't mean I don't care if she sleeps. There was a silence between them then, not cold, just full. Perrie walked to the hearth, crouched, and stirred the ashes with the poker until a few stubborn coals glowed back at her. Gideon set a tin mug beside her. It's just chicory, he said. Closest thing to coffee I've got. She took it, fingers curling around the warmth. I haven't had anything warm since before she was born. Gideon sat across from her, legs stretched out, elbows resting on his knees. You plan to keep going? I don't know where I'd go. Well, he said, you're here now. Perrie studied the wooden floorboards. You built this place yourself, mostly. My brother helped raise the frame before he went north. Rest I put together over time. You don't plan on leaving? No, he met her eyes. I got land that grows what I need and a roof that doesn't leak. That's more than most have. Hope let out a sharp cry then, and Perrie moved to pick her up, rocking her gently as she paced the room. Gideon watched the way she moved, steady and slow, the way her voice softened when she murmured nonsense into the baby's dark curls. She settles with you, he said. She's used to my heartbeat. Gideon stood and reached for his coat. I won't be long. If anyone knocks, don't open unless you recognize them. Perrie nodded. You get trouble out here, not often, but I keep a rifle by the door just the same. After he left, the wind shifted. Perrie stepped out again with Hope bundled against her chest, the blanket between them. The hills rolled in every direction, soft with morning light. In the far distance, a hawk circled above the treetops, its shadow skimming the ground below. She sat on the porch steps, her back to the cabin wall, and let Hope doze against her shoulder. Her fingers traced the baby's spine, small and warm beneath the cloth. She hadn't known she could be still like this. The trail had been all noise and fear and motion. But here, there was nothing but the creak of the trees and the occasional snap of a branch in the woods. An hour passed, maybe more. When Gideon returned, the wagon creaked and the horses huffed clouds into the cold air. He carried a sack over one shoulder and a wrapped parcel under his arm. Got a cradle, he said as he stepped up beside her, an old one from the Jensen place. Their youngest's near grown now. Perrie looked down at Hope. She's been sleeping against me since the day she was born. Then she'll sleep better with you nearby. I'll move the cot closer to the hearth and set it beside the bed. He carried the cradle in carefully, setting it down like it might break. It was plain pine, the rockers worn smooth from years of use. Perrie ran her fingers along the rail. You didn't have to do that. I know. She laid Hope inside and tucked her blanket around her. The baby stirred but didn't wake. I saw a woman in town, Gideon said as he set the parcel on the table. Asked if I'd found someone, and what did you tell her? I said I had a guest. And a child I was helping raise. You didn't say I was yours, he met her gaze. I figured that was yours to say if it ever came to it. Perrie turned away, brushing her hair back with one hand. You don't ask much, I don't take much neither. She stepped closer to the fire. Why do you live out here alone? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he poured water into a basin and washed the dust from his hands. When he dried them on a rag hanging by the door, his voice was low. Used to be more of us. Brother left, parents passed. I stayed because it was quiet. Because I could think here. Perrie watched the flames flicker. And now, I don't mind the quiet less now that it's not just mine. The cradle creaked softly as Hope shifted. Perrie looked toward the window where the light had begun to fade into the long amber of late afternoon. You want me to stay, I do, but you won't ask. No, why not? Because you've been asked for too much already. She looked back at him then, and this time her eyes didn't flinch. If I stayed, I wouldn't be someone's burden, I know. I'd have to earn my place. You already have. Her voice dropped. And the child, she'd need a father. He stepped forward, slow and certain. Then I'll be one. Perrie's throat tightened. She swallowed hard and looked down at her hands. I don't know if I can love again, she whispered. Gideon said nothing. He didn't reach for her, he didn't press, but when she finally looked up, he said, then let it come slow. Let it come honest. The wind rose outside, brushing the cabin's eaves. Inside, the silence between them felt like something fuller than words, like a promise not yet spoken, but already understood. By late October, frost clung to the fence posts each dawn, and the sound of elk bugling drifted in from the timbered ridges. Perrie had taken to rising early, before the baby stirred, and stepping outside just as the first light touched the tops of the cottonwoods. The silence at that hour wasn't empty, it breathed. It held space for her thoughts, for the woman she was still learning to become. Gideon was already in the yard, splitting wood. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, his breath puffing with each swing of the axe. He didn't speak when she walked up, just handed her a smaller bundle of kindling and pointed toward the shed. I stacked the rest yesterday, she said, setting it down beside the others. I saw. He planted the axe head in the chopping block. You've got a good eye for straight lines. I worked in a dry goods store once. Had to keep the stock neat. He nodded, then leaned on the handle of the axe, watching the sky shift from blue-gray to pale gold. You ever think of doing that again? I never thought much past the next place, or the next problem. Not what I asked. She bent to gather another armful of wood. It's different, thinking ahead. He didn't press her. She noticed he never did. Later that day, Perrie walked the half-mile path down to the creek with Hope bundled against her chest. The trail cut through a stand of fir and opened into a clearing where the water ran cold and clear over stones. She crouched near the bank and dipped her hand in, letting the chill run up her arm. A flicker of motion caught her eye, a deer, lean and dappled, stepping out from the trees. It didn't startle, just watched her with quiet eyes before lowering its head to drink. Perrie stayed still, her breath shallow, until it turned and vanished into the undergrowth. When she stood, she felt steadier. She returned to the cabin just as Gideon was unsaddling his gelding. He glanced at the baby's red cheeks and said, You took her down to the creek. She slept the whole time. Good. He brushed mud from the horse's flank. Water's low this year, might freeze early. I could help set up extra stores. If you show me what's needed, you sure you want to work that hard? I'm sure I don't want to sit still. That night, after Hope was down and the fire burned low, Perrie sat at the table sewing a button onto one of Gideon's shirts. He sat across from her, rubbing oil into the stock of his rifle. You ever learn to shoot? He asked, not looking up. No, I could teach you. I'm not afraid of the woods. Wasn't what I meant. She tied off the thread and bit it clean. What if I don't want to carry a gun? Then I'll carry one for both of us. She folded the shirt and set it aside. You always this stubborn, he looked up then, eyes steady. Only when something matters. She stood and poured water into the basin to wash her hands. Her voice was quiet. I never knew a man who didn't expect something in return. I'm not expecting anything. She dried her hands. That makes it harder. He waited while she crossed the room to the cradle and checked the baby. Then, with her back still turned, she said, I used to think I was meant to be alone, that I'd ruin anything I stayed close to. He stood slowly. You think that now? I'm not sure. You want to find out. She turned, her face unreadable in the firelight. You know what you're asking? I do. Hope shifted in her sleep, a soft sound in the stillness. Perrie crossed the room, picked up the folded shirt and handed it to him. He took it, their fingers brushing. Teach me to shoot, she said, and I'll help with the trapping lines. I'll run the smokehouse if you show me how, and I'll keep her warm and fed, but I need time to know what I feel. I'll wait, she nodded once. I believe you. And for the first time in her life, that felt like something she could lean on. By the time the first snow dusted the ridge behind the cabin, the days had settled into a rhythm that held quiet comfort. Gideon rose before light and brought in water while Perrie warmed the hearth. Hope, now nearly 2 moons old, watched the world with curious eyes from her cradle near the fire. There was a steadiness to their days, built not on words but on shared labor and small, dependable gestures. That morning, Perrie was mending a cracked leather strap from the harness while Gideon worked on the snare lines near the timberline. She'd taken to keeping Hope wrapped against her chest while she worked, her tiny body tucked snug beneath Perrie's coat. The baby was light still, but growing stronger. Her hands curled tight as if holding to something only she could see. As the morning stretched on, a distant crunch of hooves on frost-bitten grass drew Perrie's eyes to the trail. She rose slowly, placing Hope in the cradle, and reached for the rifle that stood behind the door. She didn't lift it, just braced one hand on the frame and watched as 2 riders came into view, men she didn't recognize. They stopped a good 20 yards from the porch, their horses stamping. One wore a dusty gray coat and had a mouth full of crooked teeth. The other was younger, with a scar across one cheek and a restless look about him. You Rourke's woman? The older one called. I am Perrie, she answered. He's not here. The younger man leaned forward. We're looking for a man with a sorrel gelding and a saddle marked with a pine brand. Said he passed through Willow Creek some weeks back. That your business? She asked. The older man grinned. Could be. Could be we're just passing through and wanted a warm meal and a place to water the horses. You've got the wrong place, he spat into the grass. Shame, you look like you've got hands for cooking. Perrie didn't step back. And you look like you've got hands for stealing. The younger man shifted in his saddle. We'll be on our way then. The older one hesitated, his eyes raking the porch, the cradle just visible behind the door. Perrie's voice steadied. I've got a rifle and I know how to use it. They turned, slow as cold tar, and rode off down the trail without another word. When Gideon returned before dusk, she met him at the edge of the yard. 2 men came by, she said. Looking for someone with your horse and saddle mark. He stopped mid-step. What they want, they didn't say straight. One of them looked hungry for trouble. Did they come close? Not more than the edge of the yard. He nodded, jaw tight. Was the older one missing a finger, left hand? Just 3. That'd be Clay Dorsey. He rides with a man named Mott. They drift between towns looking to trade stolen stock or worse. You know them, we crossed paths once. They don't forget a man who says no. Perrie folded her arms. If they come back, I won't wait on you. His voice was low. I won't let them near you. I didn't say I needed you to. He met her eyes. I know. Later, while Hope slept and the wind picked up outside, Gideon sat sharpening his knife by the fire. Perrie worked a new seam into a piece of oilcloth, her movements slower than usual. They'll come back, she said, likely. She set the cloth down. You could take us into town, leave us with someone until it's safe. I could, he said. But I won't, she looked at him, not angry but searching. Why? Because they'd know you were alone, and I wouldn't be there to stop them. You think you can stop everything? I think I've got more reason to try now than I ever had before. She drew in a slow breath. I'm not used to someone standing between me and danger. I'm not used to needing anyone, he said, but I do. She watched him a long moment. What if they test you on it? They won't like the answer. The wind howled against the walls, dry leaves scraping the windows. Perrie stood and crossed to the cradle, checking Hope's blanket. I've always kept moving when trouble came, she said. It's the only way I ever stayed ahead of drowning in it. You're not drowning here, she faced him. Not yet, he set the knife down. I was 20 when I first built this place. Thought if I could just hold land, I'd have something no one could take from me. And do you? I thought I did, until I saw you walking into town with blood on your boots and a child in your arms. She didn't answer. She just looked at him, the silence stretching. I don't want to hold land anymore, he said. I want to hold what I've got with you, even if it's not finished yet. She stepped closer, close enough that the firelight caught the edge of her jaw, the faint line of a scar beneath her ear. I'm still figuring out what I am without running. I'll wait while you do. Hope stirred with a soft cry. Perrie didn't move at first, she just kept her eyes on him. I want her to have more than I did. She already does. Perrie glanced at the cradle, then back to him. Then I'll stay. For her, and maybe in time for something more, he nodded once. That's enough for me. She turned to lift Hope, her touch gentle but sure. As she rocked the child, Gideon rose and stood beside her. He didn't reach for either of them. He just stood close, the warmth of his presence enough. And for the first time, Perrie didn't measure the distance between herself and safety. She measured the ground she'd already crossed, and how much stronger her steps felt now that she was no longer walking alone. The snow held through December. It clung to the slope above the cabin and softened the world into quiet whites and grays. The trail into Willow Creek lay buried under drifts, and no one passed through unless they had reason and snowshoes. Perrie didn't mind the stillness. Inside, the fire crackled low. Hope slept more than she cried. And Gideon had taken to reading aloud at night from a leather-bound volume of poems his mother had once kept. One morning, while Gideon was dressing a hare he'd trapped, Perrie sat on the floor beside the stove, mending a tear in the side of Hope's swaddling. She paused, needle caught mid-air, and looked over at him. You said your brother went north. Where did he end up? Last I heard, the Bitterroots. He took to surveying tracks, sent a letter once, said he'd carved out a life of sorts, haven't seen him since. You ever want to go after him? No, he said, wiping his hands clean with a cloth. We weren't much alike even before the war. He needed the sound of things. I needed quiet. Perrie folded the cloth in her lap. I think I used to need quiet too, but now I want steadiness, something that doesn't shift when you lean on it. You have that now. She nodded, then looked down at the mending. I've been thinking about the girl. About Hope. Gideon waited, leaning his shoulder against the doorframe. He never interrupted. I want her to grow up knowing her story, not the pain of it, but the strength. I want her to know where she came from and who stepped in when no one else did. She'll know, he said. We'll tell her. Perrie stood and crossed to the table, laying the folded cloth beside a stack of dried herbs she'd been sorting for winter medicine. And I want her to grow up with a name that means something, not just mine. Something that ties her to more than a passing hand. You want her to take my name, she met his eyes. I want both of us to take it. Gideon crossed the room slowly, stopping only when he stood close enough that she could hear the soft rasp of his breath. Are you asking? I am, she said. If you still want me, I do. His hand found hers, rough and warm. I want to build something with you, not just survive beside you. I want that too. He kissed her then, gently, like something long held finally let go. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a promise made to be revisited. It was the answer they'd both been moving toward, step by quiet step. They married the next week, just the two of them and Reverend Ellis from 3 miles down the valley, who came by with a borrowed sled and a smile too wide for his face. Hope slept through the whole thing, wrapped in the same blue shawl Perrie's mother had once worn. That night, after the Reverend had gone and the stars hung low and clear above the pine tops, Perrie stood at the window wrapped in a quilt. Gideon came up behind her, his arms circling her waist. You ever think we'd end up here? He asked. I didn't think I'd end up anywhere. He kissed the side of her neck. You're not just here, you're home. She turned in his arms. So are you. They lay beside the fire that night, hope tucked safely in her cradle, the world outside hushed and whole. Gideon fell asleep with his hand curled around hers. Perrie watched the firelight flicker across the beams overhead, and for the first time in her life, she felt no need to keep one eye open. She belonged. Not because someone claimed her, but because she chose to stay, and someone met her there step for step. Heart for heart. In the spring, the snow melted into the soil, coaxing green shoots from the ground. Gideon carved a cradleboard from pine and ash, and Perrie planted roots of her own in the cleared patch beside the shed. Onions, beans, a row of asters for color. Hope grew stronger each day, her laugh bright and wild like wind in tall grass. They built a life, not out of rescue, but out of choice. Gideon taught Hope to ride before she could walk steady, and Perrie taught her how to mend, how to listen to the woods, how to keep still when stillness was needed. Years passed, and the land held them close. Neighbors came and went, but the cabin never stood empty again. Gideon added a second room, then a third. Perrie painted the door, read the summer. Hope turned 3. They never left Willow Creek. They never needed to. And every night, when the fire burned low and the girl slept soundly in her bed, Gideon took Perrie's hand and pressed it to his chest, like a quiet vow spoken without words. She always answered the same way, by staying. By waking beside him, morning after morning, with the peace she had once thought she'd never earn, and together they lived in love. Not loud or grand, but deep and lasting, and enough for all their days.